Welcome to Web of Tomorrow. I'm Adam Garrett Harris, and this week we've got Mark Krenz, creator of CLIMagic, which is a Twitter account all about cool Unix, Linux, command line tricks, and stuff like that. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I kind of mentioned what it is, but what is CLIMagic and how did it start?
So it is a Twitter account, like you mentioned, for inspiring people to use the command line more and to see what's available. It got started back in 2009 when I just realized that, this Twitter thing was coming along, becoming popular, and I had a lot of commands that I was running as a system administrator and just as a Linux hobbyist, and I thought that, I should share some of this. And it would be interesting to try to fit the commands and maybe a description into 140 characters. It presents kind of a challenge for trying to see what you can possibly do within those constraints. And a lot of there were a couple other accounts out there like that, but mostly they would post links to like blogs. Like Command Line Foo is a website that I would frequent that had lots of good command line tips, but then their Twitter account would just link back to the web page. And I thought it might be more interesting if we could post the commands directly into the Twitter feed so you can see them right in your client. And people seem to like that.
That's cool. So what's the format for the tweets?
Right. So generally, as much as I'm able to format like this, I put the command itself and then a hash character like the shift 3, the number sign or pound, octothorpe, whatever you want to call it, and then the description. So like sometimes it's just one word. Sometimes I'm able to fit a whole sentence. So I use the hash character because it's a comment character in the shell, and it's less likely to be used anywhere else in most commands. And if you were to copy the entire tweet to the command line, you could actually run the command, and then the description would be saved as just a comment in your command line history. Sometimes I don't have, I fit like some kind of crazy command, and I use every single character I can of the 140 limit, and I don't have any room left for a description. So it's either just run it at your own risk, or I'll reply back and post a description as a follow-up or something.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I like how you don't start it with a $sign or a prompt. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I see that online, and I think that can be kind of confusing to people if you're not familiar with it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when you go to different documentation for various sites, some of them will have their own way of quoting or indicating where a command starts, and you have to know, don't actually input the greater than sign or the $sign or something like that. And they might have to explain it. And then, even in man pages, you have little syntax indicators for what's a required option, what's an optional option, and so on.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned man pages. Why don't you go ahead and explain what that is and ways to get help?
Right, and please ask me if I mentioned something that could use a better description, because I talk about this all the time and I kind of forget. For beginners, it can be a little daunting. So man pages are the short for manual pages. They were something that was invented by Bell Labs along with Unix for documenting the various programs on a Unix system. There's 8 different chapters plus a couple of extra chapters on some systems, and the chapter 1 is all about like user commands, the commands that you commonly run like ls, rm, df, and the different commands like that. And so this is just a single page of documentation. So if you run like man space ls and hit enter, you're going to be put into a pager program like less or more, and it'll show you. It'll start out with just a short description of what the command is and what it's for, and then give you information about, what options it can take, what arguments it can take, different ways you can use it, and so on, and maybe bugs and who wrote it. So it provides you with a single page documentation that you can search through and look through. Some of the man pages can get quite large, like in the tens or maybe even hundreds of pages. So that's one way of getting documentation. Another way is just to, the other way on GNU systems. So GNU is the organization that created, this GNU's not Unix. They set out to create a free Unix clone, but in the end they ended up writing a lot of software that got adopted by other systems like Linux, and they had their own way of documenting programs called info pages, which are, you basically get put into like an Emacs editor user interface, and you can do hot links within the documentation. It has a bit of a steeper learning curve to learn how to use it, but some of their official pages are actually kept in info pages, and then they get translated into man pages, like the tar command. Actually, its official documentation is in the info page.
Okay. So I was about to ask how you know which one you can use, but sounds like you can pretty much always use man, and sometimes you can use info.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's more of, man pages are almost always made available from the info pages. So if you have to default to one, you're probably going to use a man page. But on some of the man pages, they haven't filled out all of the options and all of the documentation. And if you want the complete documentation, you might have to go to the info page. But in reality, I've rarely encountered a case where I had to look at the info page for the documentation.
Okay, so you said man uses a pager. And can you explain what a pager is really quick?
Right. So a pager is, like on old DOS systems, you would run dir /p to show the output one page at a time. That way you didn't see all of it at once and just have to use your scroll bar or something to move back and forth. A pager is just a program that just shows you a page at a time. And also more advanced pagers like less let you search backwards and forwards and do different operations within the text that you're looking at. Cool.
So I'm actually curious about, you said info uses sort of Emacs. Is it actually inside of Emacs?
I've never checked actually,
okay.
But it's basically an Emacs, uses Emacs keystrokes, and it looks like Emacs. So I imagine it is based on Emacs. Right now, there's people listening that are probably, being like, you don't know. Well, I don't use info pages all that much, and honestly, I think if you ask most people, they don't use info pages all that much. But it's just, because man pages are usually always there, and they work pretty well.
And then it seems like less is the page that I use. It uses a lot of Vim shortcuts.
Right.
Or VI shortcuts, I should say.
Right. Right. I mean, almost all so many of the keystrokes inside less are based on VI shortcuts. You can even switch over to editing mode within less and end up trying to edit a man page if you hit the right key or the wrong key, depending on what you do.
Nice. Okay, so what channels of communication do you have besides Twitter?
Right. So Twitter was the first one. I created a YouTube channel a bit later, which is where I post. Basically, I make I'll make a video that explains a concept a lot more, or delves into some concept, or shows something that's visual that I need to show. I've done a variety of different things. There was one where I explained how a MIDI file works, and I showed how I could make my own MIDI file using a binary editor, and I was able to fit a MIDI music file within a tweet and the decoder for it as well. once, and it was the Halloween theme from the movie Halloween, and I posted on Halloween, so it was kind of a holiday uh, thing to post. And another one where a popular one where I showed how I watched the Super Bowl over a Netcat stream. That was, that required me to show it in a video, and I needed to do a lot of explaining for that. How that came about was that we had a server room where we had a setup for recording television closed caption data, and so we had several of these servers that were set up with TV tuners that all ran Linux, and if I wanted to, I could basically just run like the cat program to send the output of a file to the terminal, and I could just cat out /dev/video 0, and that would show me what was on the television, but I would have to pipe that into another program like mPlayer or FFmpeg or something like that. So in the video, I was able to show how I could cat the video out to an SSH connection, or actually I did it to a netcat connection, and then that sent the data over the network to my house. And then on the other side, I ran netcat and I piped that into mPlayer, and I was able to watch the video, and it was basically streaming the video over the netcat connection. And in there I talk about different things that I could do, like use the T command as kind of a digital video recorder and stuff. So I mean, the power, the power of Unix is that you can take the output of one program and pipe it to the input of another program. And since a lot of the different programs act as filters or can do operations on the data, you have a lot of flexibility in what you can do. And then on top of the YouTube channel, there's the CLIMagic channel on Freenode IRC. I don't know where you happen to use IRC, or people listening use IRC, Internet Relay Chat. So that's a place where I confide in the wisdom of others and talk to people who are also CLIMagic followers and interested in the command line. Sometimes I'll bounce ideas off of them, or they'll give me ideas, and I try to credit them as much as possible. It has about like 50 people on there, and it's kind of come and gone over the years. And then it's also become a place where people have gone just to talk to other people about, they have a question about how to do something. And the nice thing about that channel is that it doesn't, it's not specific to one shell or one distribution of Linux or even one Unix. It's just all about command line usage. So, there's not any discrimination or anything that happens there. It's just whatever you choose to use is okay. So we can kind of talk about the command line in a more general sense there, which there might not be another channel like that. A lot of them are specific to a shell like Bash or ZSH or something like that. And then there's the CLIMagic website, climagic.org or .com, where I have a few links to other resources, a book you can that's good for beginners, and some files that I've created over the years. I have like a cool stuff directory and different things. There's also a Magic Lights show, so you can go to lights.climagic.com and you can start up this little video, and you can click on the little LED lights and you can control them, or you can use command line commands to actually control the lights. And those are lights that are at my house on a shelf, and I have a webcam set up, and I explain more about that on the site.
I went and played around with that the other day.
Yeah. It actually was broken here recently because I accidentally unplugged the Raspberry Pi that it was hooked up. I didn't realize that it was turned off.
Oh.
So sometimes stuff like that happens.
So why Magic? Why is it CLIMagic?
Well, yeah, this is kind of funny. So it's basically because it's really not magic. It's kind of based on the old saying that it's Arthur C. Clarke's third law. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So over the years you encounter people who know how to use the command line. in a way that just is awe-inspiring. You look at them and you're like, how did you do that? You're surprised and shocked that they're able to do something so complex with just a few keystrokes or a few commands. And it seems like magic, and it seems like something that's not learnable, but it is learnable. And I'm trying to inspire people to learn more about it and to see that it is learnable. It's not magic. So it's kind of a reverse psychology there. I feel like the human brain has such a great capacity for learning things and storing information that so many of us take for granted and don't exercise frequently enough. And I feel like people, everybody wants for computers to be easy to use, and it's not that the command line is necessarily hard to use. It's just that you have to practice it. It's like learning a language. You wouldn't say that. I mean, I guess you would say that languages like Russian or Swahili might be hard to learn, or Chinese. But if you have a need to use it, you take the time to learn how to speak the language. So Unix is kind of like that. And I probably have a file someplace where I was brainstorming over names, and I finally came to that one. I thought that CLIMagic was a good mix between being short enough that wasn't, and being easy to remember.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So you mentioned having a need to use the command line. What are some example reasons why someone might want to use the command line?
So my reason stemmed out of being working at an internet service provider and being a system administrator. For other people, it could be a variety of things. They need to work with a lot of data. Programmers might want to, use a text editor like Vim or Emacs or Atom or Nano or whatever, and use the Git software for managing their source code or some other source code repository software. Scientists use it for parsing their research data. They find the command line programs for just grep or awk or sed or the R programming language or different things, and graphing. There's it's kind of limitless as to what you can do. I wouldn't say it's great for everything. I mean, some people might be surprised to hear that I don't use the command line for everything. I'm an avid user of programs like GIMP and Blender and Audacity and a web browser, and various different GUI programs. But I use the command line where it makes sense, and I use it for my email, for my file management, for my searching for data and doing automation operations. And if I need to do like batch operations on images or sound or documents, and then, a variety of network operations that you can do. So if you want to check your network connectivity or connect to a remote server securely or download a web page using curl or wget or something like that, it's incredibly useful and used by developers, and people who even don't even consider themselves to be command line friendly or just into the command line. They still end up using a lot of these programs when they have to, because there might not be a good alternative for a procedure inside the GUI for doing the same thing.
Yeah. I started using command line because of Git.
Right. You mean GIT?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
What is GET?
There's actually a program called capital GET, which is a front end to the Perl HTTP library or for doing HTTP requests. So it functions like the GET procedure call in HTTP protocol.
Yeah.
And there's a corresponding one for POST.
Okay.
But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that that's what you meant. You meant GIT.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what is so great about the command line?
Well, like I was saying about languages, once you once you understand the language, you're not limited or constricted by what another person's vision is for what you can do with your computer. It's your terminal window becomes a portal into the heart of your system that lets you do what you want. And everything, in Unix, one of the mantras of Unix is that everything is a file, and that's true or not true depending on what you're talking about as a file. But generally, everything can be treated like a file. If you've ever heard of Plan 9, Plan 9 is an operating system that they made after they made Unix at Bell Labs. So they went on to make Plan 9, and they tried to extend that philosophy of everything as a file.
Okay.
But so inside Unix, everything is a file, and the idea is that programs are filters. So you can start your file stream with a program like cat or sed or awk or grep, and then you can pipe the output of that into another program like another grep, while loop. You can pipe it into any other program, basically. WC to count the words or lines, unique to search for different unique lines, or maybe into sort, so you can sort the output and stuff like that. And then you have lots of different programs for working with different kinds of data. Like you have CLIMagic for working with image data, converting between different image formats or making different modifications to images. SOX, which is they call it the Swiss Army toolkit for sound. So you can do lots of different sound operations. So there's quite a bit that you can do. I feel like even though I've been doing this for almost 8 years now, and I have almost 10,000 commands, 10,000 tweets, maybe about half of them are unique. And I still feel like there's quite a bit that I haven't explored, but I just haven't had the need to explore it. So sometimes people post stuff, they'll ask me a question, they'll say, do you know how to do this? And it'll be interesting enough that I'll try to explore how to do it. It won't be something simple, it'll be something new. And so I'll come up with some solution for them and share it with the rest of the followers.
Cool. So in Unix, with everything being a file, does that mean a directory is also a file?
In a way. I mean, a directory is basically kind of like a file with an index of the different files. In reality, it's not really that way. But I'm talking about in an abstract point of view. They both are they both have metadata on the actual file system. But you can't really treat a directory like a file and cat out the directory and get a listing of the file contents or something like that. So yeah, there are some exceptions to that idea. But when I say everything's a file, like for instance, you can treat the output of a program like a file. You can treat a device drive. You can treat a device like dev video, which might be your webcam. It might be a TV tuner. You can treat that like a file. You can treat dev random or dev zero or something like that like a file to get different data. And network data can be treated like a file if you use a program like netcat or socat.
Okay. Yeah, so even if the data is streaming in, you can still treat it like it's a file that's being written to.
Right. And Bash, so the Bash shell has, it even has an option where you can, there's a device dev TCP. I need to look up the syntax real quick because I don't use it very often. If you say /dev/TCP/host/port, you can basically write the output of a file to the network using those special device names. You can search for that in the man page and see how the syntax works for that. And so that if you don't have netcat or socat on your system, you can still make use of that idea directly from within Bash.
So you focus your tweets on Bash on Linux, right?
Right.
So why have you focused on that?
Well, first of all, because it's what I use. I mean, I guess it's kind of selfish to say, but it's Bash on Linux is what I use. But it also happens to be the most commonly used shell probably in modern usage. I mean, you also have Fish and ZSH and CCSH and KSH and different shells. And then you have PowerShell on Windows. Maybe you could say PowerShell is the most commonly used shell since it has the widest install base. Mac systems, they come with Bash. And you can install what you want, but it's what most people end up encountering when they delve into the command line, unless they've been introduced to it by somebody else, maybe who was an avid user of one of those other shells. If they just start to say how to use the command line, they're probably going to encounter Bash first, or if they just download Linux or something, they're probably going to encounter Bash. If they download like FreeBSD, then they encounter CSH or TCSH or something probably first.
Okay.
But I call it like the lingua franca of shells because its features are very common with other shells. There are some features that it doesn't have in common, but it's the one that if I post a command in, probably people will be able to translate to other shells. And you'll have to figure out how to do it in your shell if it doesn't work in your shell. So
can you explain the difference between a terminal emulator and a shell?
Right. So terminal emulator, it seems like kind of a weird idea, but it goes back to when we had or when they had terminals hooked up to large mainframes, and they were just like dummy terminals that had a keyboard and a monitor and a input processor and an output processor, and they didn't necessarily do the computation that you were doing on the terminal. They sent the text you were sending to the mainframe, and these actually come from typewriters that they used to have hooked up to them. So they didn't even have a monitor necessarily hooked up to it when Ken and Dennis wrote Unix. They were doing so through a typewriter, which seems unimaginable now, but it was what it was. So when when microcomputers came along and we started having computers on our desk and in our homes, people who wanted to be able to talk to these mainframes, they would use what's called a terminal emulator, and that was basically a black window that you brought up and showed text in it. But the emulator part is based around the idea of emulating different term cap modes. So you might have heard of the term variable, and you set that to different things like VT100 or Linux or Screen or VT220. Back in the 90s when I was connecting to the net for the first time, you'd have to change your term mode to different VT100 or VT220 depending on what you're connecting to or what system you were using. And so the emulation part doesn't refer to emulating the monitor. It refers to emulating the different term cap types. So if you just type in like echo space $ and then capital TERM, you'll see what your term cap type is.
Yeah, so mine is xterm-256 color.
Right. There's a huge variety of them now, and a lot of them that you're going to encounter on Linux will be like xterm or RxVT or Screen or or Linux. If you're in the console on Linux, like not inside X Windows, but on the actual text console, you'd see term equals Linux. And if you try to set it to one of the other terminal types, you might end up with some weird characters sometimes. Or the inability to do certain things like page up and page down or something like that. Or maybe you won't be able to display Unicode characters. So this is what the emulation part of a terminal emulator does. And so basically you download a program or run a program like xterm or RxVT or iterm or PuTTY. PuTTY is a terminal emulator and SSH client all in one.
Okay.
And Telnet client all in one. So it kind of does a lot of different things. And I I use URXVT, which is the Unicode RXVT. I used to use GNOME Terminal until I discovered one day that GNOME Terminal was actually writing all the data that was in the scrollback buffer to disk. This was back in 2012. Interestingly enough, it was a command. It was a CLIMagic command I was posting, basically checking the output of LSOF, which is a list open file handles. So it basically shows on your computer what files each program has open, and it was a way to see which ones were deleted. And so I noticed that the GNOME terminal was I was using XFCE4 terminal, but anyways, it's based on GNOME terminal. It uses a library called libvte. So the terminal was opening up a file inside the /temp directory, and then immediately unlinking that file. And it would keep the file handle open, and it was a way of writing the data. When I say scrollback buffer, I mean like if you use your mouse wheel to scroll up, or if you use the scroll bar on your terminal emulator to scroll up, you'll see like what you've seen before. So it would be writing this data out to this file and onto your hard drive, and then when you would close the window, it would the file handle would go away. But because you can still read the data on the disk, there were ways of recovering the data that it had written out to the file. And I made a video that demonstrates this and explains why it's a really bad thing. It basically hadn't been done before in Unix that I was aware of, and it kind of violated a trust that Unix users had in the terminal emulator developers, that they wouldn't be writing out the data to the disk, and that the data that was in your terminal would never end up on the disk. It would only be in memory. Of course, if you're swapping your memory out to disk, it would end up on disk. But that was something that people were aware of.
Yeah, I wonder if it still does that, because I'm using GNOME Terminal right now.
They, in recent versions, it did this from like 2009 until about 2014, I think. I think it's when they changed it so that what it does is it starts writing the data with an encrypted key, or with a key to encrypt it on the disk. So you end up with data that's encrypted on the disk, but still writes it to the disk, which is better. But what if? I guess eventually you might be able to crack the key, given like 20 years or something like that. I mean, that's probably not important to people at that point. Once it's being encrypted, it's fine. But it was the fact that they had made this change and they didn't really warn anybody about it, and so for several years there was a lot of potentially sensitive data being written to the disk.
Yeah.
And in ways that people didn't necessarily understand. People might be setting up Linux systems or whatever to take data about medical information for people, and so they think that it's safe because somebody's connecting to a remote system, but all the while, your terminal emulator was actually writing the data also to the local disk, and it might be able to be recovered in some way. So
yeah, okay, so that's a terminal emulator, and then the shell is what?
So the shell is actually the interpreter. It's the command that the terminal emulator usually runs when you start it. So a terminal emulator could run any command. By default, it's going to run the shell that you have configured for your user. In my case, it's bash. So when I run URXVT, it starts up the terminal emulator, then starts up bash, and then bash sits there and gives me the prompt, like the $ or something with my username and maybe the directory that I'm in. And then it waits for me to type in something. So I type in a command, and when I hit enter, the shell takes the command I typed in and figures out what to do with it. So either it's going to be a command that's on the file system, or it's going to be some keywords like for a while loop or something like that. Or I typed in help or echo or something like that, or it's going to have to reference its environment variables, like that term variable I was talking about. That's an environment variable. So the shell keeps track of those environment variables, the commands. It keeps, it knows where to look for the command on the file system and so on.
Cool. And I guess one of those environment variables is path, right?
Right. Yeah, that's one that people encounter early in their Unix uses often. So, although maybe not anymore, but it was when I started learning. So path, is a list of directories that your shell is going to look through when you type in just the name of the command without giving it the entire path to it on the file system. So, if I type in ls, it's going to look for the ls file inside every directory that's listed in the path. So, it would end up finding it in /bin, but it could also be in /usr/bin, or whatever you have in your path. You can add things to your path, like maybe /home/username/bin or user local bin or something like that, or /opt. Sometimes you end up installing programs in the opt directory.
Yeah. So how do you know which path it's using whenever you run a command?
Well, you can use the which command. There's actually a WHICH command that if you type in which space and then the name of the command, it'll show you the one that it's going to pick. And if you do that for like a shell built in, it's going to say, it's just going to give you nothing. And then if you use the type command, so TYPE, at least this is in Bash, the type command, and you type in like ls, it'll tell you whether it's aliased or is pointing to /bin/ls, or if it's a shell built in, it'll say like, ls is a shell built in. Ls isn't a shell built in, but like the echo command is a shell built in. So which and type are two different ways of figuring out what it's going to look up.
And I don't know, is there a way to find out if a command is in multiple spots?
There's also a where is. So if you type in like where is ls, it's going to say ls is at /bin/ls, and it's also at /usr share man1 ls.1, maybe .gz, depending on what you're doing. So yeah, you would ask me for examples, wouldn't you? Yeah, I can't think of a good one which would be in multiple places right now.
I mean, I don't know why a command would be in multiple places, but I guess you could accidentally clobber one of those commands yourself, especially if you got your path in the wrong order.
Right, exactly. If you overloaded a command, overloading in the sense of programming, like having the same name for two different things. So you could have your own version of ls that is maybe in your home bin directory, but it's also in /bin. Maybe you also have one that's in USR local bin. So yeah, that would show you would show you the all the different places where it is. And sometimes you might find that you're running a command and it seems weird, the output that you're getting from it or what it's doing, and you're wondering why. And so you might run where is and then the command name to see if you're actually getting the one that you think it is. It could even be that somebody has put some malware on your system and you're running some malicious command. I just thought of something that would be very useful for web programmers. So one common situation you run into when you're doing web programming is you might have different, say, PHP interpreters. So you might need to look up where is the PHP interpreter that I'm using, and you might find that you've installed multiple versions. So that's another way that you could use where is. I've encountered that several times where I end up having multiple different versions of Perl or PHP or Python or whatnot installed. And I wasn't using the one I thought I was using.
Yeah. What are some other special variables besides path?
So some other variables. Let me see. Well, there's the TZ variable, which is time zone data. So that's going to tell you what time zone you're set in, and if you want to set it to a different time zone, You can, do TZ equals Asia/Tokyo, or give it the specific, UTC time zone format that you
Is
need.
that capital T, capital Z?
Yeah, capital T, capital Z. Yeah, it's pretty much all the environment variables are going to have capital letters.
Yeah.
Uh,
So
a lot of
I tried echoing, echo $TZ, and I've got nothing.
Well, I mean, some of them aren't actually set, but if you set them to something, so if you type in like TZ
okay.
equals Asia, and with a capital A for in Asia, and then Tokyo, with their proper capitalization, and then space and date, it'll give you the time, the current time in Tokyo, the time and date. So that can be useful. Another one on the file system that's useful is old PWD. So PWD means present working directory or print working directory, depending on how you're talking about it. Old PWD stores the last directory you were in. So if you are in a directory and then you cd to another directory and you want to say move some files from that directory to the directory you were in, you can type in like move space star to get all the files in that directory, or maybe star dot php space and then $ old pwd slash, and that'll move everything that's like a PHP file into the old into the directory you were previously in that's referenced by old pwd.
Is that the same thing as when you do cd space dash and it will move you into the last directory you're in?
Yeah, so I suppose cd space dash is actually utilizing the old pwd variable. I don't know whether, I've never tried to, let me see, old pwd. Oh, yeah, it is. So if you type in actually if you set old pwd to something and then you type in cd space dash, it'll actually take you to what you set it to, even if you weren't there before.
Okay, nice.
I've never actually tried that. So, so yes, that proves that it's actually using the old pwd variable. So, see, we did a little CLIMagic on this podcast.
Yeah. So, what are some of your top tips that are just easy to say out loud on a podcast? Because I know some of them would be too hard to say out loud.
Right. Well, some of the top ones are maybe jokes that I've made or something like that. Maybe some of them are inappropriate jokes. I'll save those. You can search for those. Interestingly enough, the ones that are like the most retweeted or something aren't commands at all. They're maybe just inspiring anecdotes or something that I sent out. Like, Grace Hopper is somebody who is looked up to a lot by everybody in the computer science industry and in the world, really, for making the first compiler and making the COBOL programming language. At a time when people said that it was impossible to make a programming language compiler. But she didn't let that stop her.
That's amazing.
But so the interesting thing, is that a lot of people think that computer science and technology is a game for the young, but she actually got started when she was 37. She enlisted in the Army when she was 37, and then she went on to develop these things later in her life. So, for a lot of people who are, getting up there in the years, I'm getting up there in the years, it's inspiring to hear that, it doesn't matter how old you are, you can just put your mind to it and don't let anybody stop you, and you can accomplish a lot. So, that was a top one. A lot of the ones that are based around keystrokes are really popular. Like some, Control R is a keystroke you can press to search backwards for a command. So if you press Control R and you start typing in letters, you're gonna, like if you type in ls or rm or maybe a word or something or a file name, you're gonna be searching back through your command line history for what you're typing in. And you can press Control R repeatedly to continue going backwards through your history.
So this is if you're using GNU readline, right? Using Emacs mode.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you for pointing that out. So not only am I using Bash on Linux, but I'm also using Emacs readline mode within Bash. You can also use VI mode, but I don't know. I've gotten used to Emacs, even though I'm a VI user. So it's just, I don't know. I find it easier, and I've never been able to get used to using VI mode in the shell for some reason.
Yeah, I was the same way for a long time. I'm a Vim user, and I learned all the Emacs shortcuts for readline, but I've recently switched over to it, and it is interesting how you can hit V and then go open up Vim to completely edit your command inside of Vim.
Right. You can also do that in Emacs mode. There's a command called FC, which will let you open up your favorite editor and edit the command that you're running. And then there's also
how do you do that?
So basically, if you run a command, then if you type in the FC command, it'll actually edit the last.
Oh, okay. I wonder if there's a way to just edit the current command you're typing.
So let me see. The keystroke for that is Control X, Control E is edit and execute a command. So, I mean, there's a way to do it in the Emacs mode as well. And then other keystrokes, it's like Control A to go to the beginning of the line, Control E to go to the end. Control W will erase the previous word, and Control U will clear the line. So from wherever you are in the line to the beginning. Some people point out that you can also use home and end, and to go to the beginning and the ending of the line, but not every distribution is set up to do that. Not every, some of the distributions have put that in by default, but not all of them. So that's
plus you have to move your hand so far for that.
Yeah, you have to move your hand so far, and on some keyboards it might be tricky to actually press home and end. So like on laptops, and also page up and page down can be difficult to press sometimes. And then one that I use frequently is the meta key, which meta basically refers to either pressing escape or the alt key. I'll explain that in a second. So you press let's say you press alt and then the period, it'll insert the last argument that was on the last command that you ran. So if you were to edit something, in your favorite editor, and then right after you exit, you could run RM and then hit alt dot, and it'll insert the name of that file, after the RM command.
Nice.
And then you can choose to run it or not. And then if you hit alt dot multiple times, you're going to go backwards even more arguments back through each command in your history. So that's a quick way to pull arguments from your history to do other operations on them. The meta is kind of it's a historical thing. There used to be an actual meta key on keyboards, and the way they emulate that in newer keyboards is to use the alt key or escape, and it's basically what it sends is the escape character followed by whatever you press. So it sends an escape character followed by the dot. When you press it with the alt key, it does that in one go, in one sequence. When you do it with escape, you're actually pressing the escape to get the escape key, and then you're pressing the dot. So it's like two different operations instead of one.
Okay.
So that's why you see both keys referenced.
Well, looks like unfortunately we're running out of time. I can ramble. We could talk about this for hours.
Right.
But anyway, is there anything else you'd really like to add?
Well, basically, just try. If you follow the Twitter feed and you see something that you don't understand, try to break it down into its little sections. Look in between each of the pipes or in between each of the greater than signs or each of the semicolons, and just run man and then the command name, or run help and then the command name, and try to figure out what each section does, because you don't want to look at like a picture. It's not like something you take as the whole. You have to look at the individual pieces, and they make up the whole. So
yeah, and then you can look at each flag and see what it does.
Right. And maybe just pick a different command each day and try to learn what it does. And eventually, after a few months, you'll actually be quite adept at using the command line, and you'll be able to control your system a lot better.
Yeah, I think like when you don't know command line very well, you don't really know what's possible or what you would even use it for. But once you start learning it, then there's so many things you can use it for.
Right. And a lot of people are discovering that. I never thought that I would have more than 5,000 followers, but now I have over 100,000, 100 and almost 140,000. And I don't even think I've even reached everybody that, is on Twitter or even in the world that uses a command line by far. So it's still popular. It's still widely used, and I encourage you to check it out.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks.
Oh, by the way, I wanted to tell you that I record my podcast now using the command line.
That's awesome.